Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everyone. Very excited to have author J.E. Weiner on the show. And you can go to our website. Just go into the episode notes or go to jeweiner.com, and that's Weiner. Her new novel or debut novel is out now. It's called The Wretched and Undone, and it takes us into the Texas Hill Country of Bandera, the cowboy capital, right? So welcome, J.E. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks so much for having me.
So now, were you raised in Texas in the Hill Country area?
Not in the Hill Country. I was raised in Dallas, but my
Okay.
whole family lives in the Hill Country now.
Oh, cool. We stayed in Bandera
Yeah?
a couple years ago, and it was kind of it was right after that big freeze hit Austin and
Oh,
that whole
yeah.
area. Remember that?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
really nasty, and but it was the beginning of spring. It was kind of around this time of year, little wildflowers, and it was interesting because they had black buck that don't belong there walking around in places, and but it was so rugged and so beautiful and interesting. So yeah, so this is where your book was set is in Bandera, cowboys.
Yes.
There
Yes.
really are cowboys there.
There are still to this day. And,
Yes,
you know, the
they're
cowboy
cute.
capital of the world, of course.
Yeah, because I remember we were doing something. There's this huge courthouse, very historic courthouse, and I think there's a duplicate of it somewhere in Kentucky. There was a story that we were doing on it, and we'd just gotten there, and everyone's like, "No, it really is the cowboy capital." And we were just starting to do our research on the area, and I swear, a pickup full of cowboys, like a double truck, comes by, and I'm like, "Hey, there really are cowboys here." So why did you set your book there? The story.
So my sister bought a ranch along the Medina River, which is actually one of
Oh,
the
beautiful.
most beautiful parts of
Mm.
that part of the world. And went to visit her a bunch. And one visit over the winter time with a glass of wine around the fire, she confessed that she thought the place was haunted. And we
Cool.
said, do tell. And she had seen a woman dressed in 1800s, like a long white dress, wandering in her front yard one night when she was bringing groceries in. Her husband had seen this woman cross in front of the kitchen window and thought my sister was outside without a coat on and was shouting at her through the window, put your coat on. And they also had a babysitter who was there who stayed overnight one night and woke up to find this woman standing over her with papers in her hands. So it was more than just a one-off. And we did a little snooping around, and my sister came to find out that this woman was no secret to the people in Bandera. There had been a murder-suicide on the ranch at the turn of the century, the 20th century, and that's who we think she probably was.
Wow. So this inspires a novel.
It did. It started the wheels of spinning, and then spending time in Bandera. It is a quirky place, but with this unbelievable history. And I started wondering, like, who was this woman and how did she get here and why won't she leave? And so I started just researching and almost wrote the novel in reverse, went back in time and really landed on 1854, eve of the American Civil War, when a group of Polish settlers came and helped found the town. And that's
Oh,
really how
wow.
the novel came together.
Well, it's interesting because it does have interesting history because isn't it like a part of a route, a cattle route where from Canada, is it? Or
Well, so it was one of the southern tributaries of the Chisholm Trail, and
that's
a
right.
lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
cat. It was really coming from the south, and they fed into what became the Chisholm Trail up through Fort Worth and then to the stockyards in Kansas and elsewhere. It was a main thoroughfare during the mid 1800s to late
Mm.
1800s, during the cattle
Oh,
era.
man. Yeah, because I think we weren't in Bandera. It was, I think there is a town, Medina. Is it?
Yeah, yeah,
That's
right.
where we were.
Yes.
That's
You went
where
to
we
the Apple
were.
store there. I hope you went to the Apple store and ate some of their amazing pies.
It was during COVID, like when we were there, I
Oh,
think.
no.
At around that time frame, we didn't get to do much. We did hang out at the river, though.
Yeah, beautiful.
There was a beautiful park because we document parks and public lands. I went to, is it Lost Maple State Park? Lost Maples or Maple something. It's
Yeah.
around and down, but there's a lot. It's like a biker's route, like motorcycle. And there's like a motorcycle museum down the road. Anyway, so it was just a trip. It was a trip. And I remember good food. There was good food, but it was a while ago.
Great
Yeah.
barbecue.
But
And
I know where you're talking about with the Apple store. I remember seeing it there, and but I don't remember being haunted there. So that's kind of a bummer. Like, I want to see the lady. Did you ever think you would write a novel in your life? I mean, to get go down this rabbit hole and then go, huh, you know what? I'm going to start writing a novel. I mean, that's I can understand the rabbit hole, but then deciding to actually write a book.
yeah. So it's really interesting. I mean, this sort of started as something in the back of my brain, and I talked about it for way too long. And I will admit, my husband tired of hearing me talk about how I wanted to write someday. And so for a birthday present, he signed me up for a continuing studies class here at Stanford, where I live. And it was called How to Start Your Novel and Keep It Going. And so I was like,
Wow.
all right, I took the class and I wrote the first chapter. And there's just no looking back after that.
Oh, wow. Oh, now are you going to do another one? I know
I
I'm
do
jumping
have
the
another
gun,
book.
but
Yeah. Not,
okay.
yeah, I do.
Well, this is so cool because you got history
Mhm.
and, the ghosty thing going on. But
Mhm.
that's, to me, part of Southern fiction.
Yeah.
And Texas belongs in that Southern fiction side, I believe. Don't you
Oh, yeah.
think?
I do. I think it took a little while for Southern Gothic to move west. I will say that Cormac McCarthy probably was the first
Mm.
author that sort of broke through and brought some of those themes into Western writing. With his trilogy and Blood Meridian in particular. But it's taken off. And then there's a whole other, I would say, like branch that brings the two together. And it's called Texas Noir. And there are
Mm.
a lot of writers. It tends to have more of a crime thriller. There's always a PI who's probably not a great person in the story, murder mystery. But there's like a dark humor and also just a bleakness to the theme. So it is evolving, but definitely Texas should be part of the Southern Gothic tradition for sure.
Yeah, I think so. But then also you're telling immigrant stories, which I think people, you know, Sid Ballman's been on our show. He's an amazing author, and he tells some of the immigration stories of Texas and how, you know, camels were brought in and all kinds of things
Oh
through
yeah.
this. And you got camels.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Okay,
So I
Camel.
had to bring up the camels. I'm a camel freak. So I had to bring up the camels. I did that with him too. I'm like, sorry, but you got camels. But the immigration stories is sometimes, I think, is such an important part of history for Texas and the culture. But you bring in Polish history, which sometimes we think German a lot. There's some Russian history, Arab history, but and you bring in the Polish side, which people don't maybe think about or know about.
Yeah. So what's really interesting, and I'm sure your other guests talked about this, the port of Galveston in the mid 1800s was almost as busy as Ellis Island, right? It was a port
Mm,
of entry for that was very, very busy. And in the 1850s, just due to tumult between Russia and Poland and Austro-Hungarian
mm.
Empire, people were fleeing. And there was also a really strong Catholic missionary movement at the time. And a number of Polish priests had come over to be part of that Catholic
Oh,
missionary
wow.
movement. And they wrote letters back to their parishes in Poland and said, come, fertile land, freedom, religion, where you will have a whole new life here. And they wooed all these people to come. And there were 12 I mean, it wasn't the only steamship that came over, but the one that landed in Bandera were 12 families that came over from the port of Bremen, arrived on almost, I think it was almost near Christmas Eve, 1854, and made their way by ox cart another 300 miles to Bandera, where they heard somebody was hiring people at the shingle factory. They were making cedar shingles in town,
Wow.
and they had work for people. So they made their way there. Another group came and settled a little town called Panna Maria, which is nearby. It's further
Mhm.
south from San Antonio, but and they were part of the founding families of the town. But there were also a number of Mormons. It was a big Mormon enclave,
Mm,
a lot of Germans, as you said, Poles. Those are
mm.
the three biggest groups in Bandera.
Isn't there a town, isn't it Utopia? Am I remembering?
Yeah, there is a
There's a
town in
town called, there is a town called Utopia.
Bandera. I
It's,
don't know as
it's
much
like,
about that as I do Bandera, but
no,
yes.
we drove through it and it's like, don't stop because I mean, it's tiny, but I wanted to know the history. So I love that you've done this. Do you feel like you're sharing history through fiction? Because sometimes it's hard to teach history, right, and share it without it having. I think
Yeah.
historical fiction is like the best storytelling learning way to, to get your knowledge of history.
Yeah. So I studied history. I have a master's in history, although
Oh,
it's in
wow.
Russian history, so it doesn't really help me
Wow.
when it comes to Texas. But the idea of, and I did a lot of work with oral histories and memoir in my master's work. And then I worked for a little while translating oral histories as part of that. And that always intrigued me. And so in researching this book, there was this, he was a newspaper man across the Southwest. He landed in Bandera and he started a couple newspapers. His name was J.M. Hunter. And then he also opened the Frontier Times Museum, which is just a museum that collects all the artifacts from the Bandera region. But he collected all these oral histories and he put them in a book. And it was when the
Wow.
original founders were like in their 80s and 90s. And so I just found those so fascinating, and they added a lot of color to the characters.
Wow. Yeah, to be able to, it's like reading people's diaries and letters. That always gives you that extra, So you
Yeah.
get the texture from the actual, these anecdotes and these stories from people that really lived there. So
Yeah.
did you change names and things like that? Like
Oh
as you're
yeah.
writing?
Well,
Because
I
it's
like
not, it's still a novel.
it is a novel. Let me be clear. There are
Yeah.
no there are no biographies here. Well, everything you write comes from your experience and who you meet. I think they were inspired. All the characters in this book are made up outright, or they are amalgams of types of people who lived at the
Mhm.
time. And so yeah, it's definitely fiction.
Now, have you had any feedback from people from Bandera in the Hill Country area?
Well, so not yet specifically, although a couple
Yeah, I
things.
mean, the book just came out.
The
Yeah.
book just came out. The Frontier Times Museum has invited me to come for an event in June, and they're going to do an
Awesome.
evening sort of, wine and cheese and let me talk about the book. And then there's a gentleman who's the secretary of their board who I just reached out when I was trying to find pictures to use in my social media and wanted to just make
Mhm.
sure I dotted all my I's and crossed all my T's as far as licensing was concerned. And he was like, "No, this is great. I have a collection of old articles and a collection of old postcards. You can just have them." And he just started PDFing them and sending them to me. Um,
Wow.
so that's the feedback I've gotten so far. They're definitely intrigued, but I haven't gotten any love letters or any hate mail, so we'll see.
Yeah, you don't want the hate mail from Texas. That would
No,
be kind of
no,
bad. You don't
that
want
would be
that.
bad. I
But
don't think
yeah,
it.
I wasn't aware of that, like thinking like how close Galveston is of people moving into Texas through there. I mean, I think it does kind of get left off the plate for us
Yeah,
all. It kind of
yeah.
forget the big story for me out of Galveston is Cabeza del Vaca, that when he came through and I think it was like 200 uh, soldiers. But this is way back, I think in the 1600s, maybe
Yeah.
1700s, landed and they all got sick and shipwrecked and got on the island and basically crawled through the desert and they died. They all were sick, and Cabeza de Vaca turned out to be the very first travel writer of Texas because he wrote
Oh,
everything down.
wow.
So it's a
Check that out.
story. Like that's my first thing of Galveston. And I went to Galveston just to find his monument. Like
Mhm.
there's a thing. And I found it and it was just like, here's a little square. And everybody else had bigger things. And then some stuff was taken down or whatever, but here's your little square. And I'm like,
Yeah.
so now I have to go to Houston because they have a big sculpture of him in the
Oh, do they?
botanical garden or something. So, but it's kind of those are those rabbit holes. And I'm not writing a novel, but you sure did.
Yeah, they are rabbit holes. And particularly around what I found really interesting is around the Civil War, Indianola was also a big port. Uh,
Okay. Yeah.
from during particularly during the military times, that's where the camels came through, the camels that they brought in for the US camel experiment that
Yeah.
Jefferson Davis led. So that was really interesting. And then what I don't think people realize is that the Texas-Mexico border and General Pershing, who was very famous in World War I and went over to sort of lead our troops in Europe, he was fighting Pancho Villa on the border there, and many of the troops that eventually went over into the trenches in Europe during World War I were trained on the Texas-Mexico border.
Wow.
And there were German agitators in Mexico trying to stir up trouble on the border as well during that time to keep the United States preoccupied. So there's this really interesting, a lot of the troops went there to train before they went over to Europe,
Wow.
in the army.
Did you feel like you were charting a map of the world while you were putting this book together, like to get your history all aligned? Like this stuff was going on, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, someone asked me, like, how did you keep it all straight? And so, as an historian, I kind of did a timeline and then I figured out who my characters were and sort of across that
Mm,
timeline. And then I made sure that they sort of got linked up with real and actual events. And so that I didn't
mm,
goof it up. I didn't want to, you know, as an historian and then now as a writer, I understand the liberties piece of it and you can take some liberties, but you don't want to create a story that like could never have possibly actually happened.
right.
So
Right.
that's
Yeah. Now tell us about your characters because those are the characters are always the most important thing,
right.
in a book, regardless of the history is important too, but tell everybody the main characters of your book,
Sure. Well, this is a four-generation family saga in the Southern
which we
Gothic,
love.
which
We
we
love
love, in
that.
the
Yeah.
Southern Gothic tradition, but also with a mashup of Western, because it does take place in Texas and a little bit of Texas noir. But it starts with the arrival of Marcin and Agnieszka Anderwald, who come
See,
from
I let you
Poland.
see how I let you pronounce that?
I tried to do it right. I did have someone who is Polish who did come up to me and say, "You got to say it a little bit different." So I was like,
Okay,
"Okay."
say it again. Say it again. I want to hear it.
Marcin and Agnieszka Nowak.
Wow, that's cool
Andervold.
though.
Novak Andervold is the name.
Okay.
So it's their arrival, and they are one of the fictionalized 12 families. So a couple who comes
Mm,
over and makes their way to Bandera. They arrive to a world that is just on the verge of cataclysm in the Civil War. It is an angry time in Texas history as well. There are wars between U.S. Army and the Comanche. Brutal. I mean, very, very brutal all the way around. There were incursions and a brewing conflict with
mm,
the Mormon community in the region. What you thought, let alone what you said, could get you hung, on a dime.
wow.
And so it was a really brutal, angry time. And they arrive. They don't speak the language. It's not really what they envisioned from these letters that this priest sent home. Everybody's poor.
Mm.
Nobody has enough to eat. Shelter's even dicey at times.
So Utopia was not founded at this point.
Utopia was not found here. So it's the story of them, and he's not conscripted officially, but unofficially to the Confederate Army when they move into Texas to come up to Camp Verde. And the story is he's a carpenter and he's conscripted to come and build wagons for these camels. And when he gets to Camp Verde, he encounters a vile private who is angry, comes from an abused background, who is just a real piece of work, who basically tortures Union prisoners of war who are there. And
Mm,
Marchin has a conflict with him, and the soldier dies. And it's not a spoiler, it's the trigger of the whole book. So it's okay that people know that. But he comes back to haunt Marchin and he pledges to curse his family for the generations to come. So Marchin comes home and he
well, this
brings
is polite.
yeah. He comes home. His wife has basically had a nervous breakdown being alone for all these many months, alone, scared, frightened, hungry. And he tries to make things right. And lo and behold, some of the soldiers from Camp Verde come and join him, including a couple of camel wranglers. They have nowhere to go. So it's the story of their found family and sort of how they make life together on this
That's awesome.
ranch. And then it's the subsequent generations and how that curse follows the men and women of the Andervald family through to the mid 20th century.
It's wild when you think about Poland, right?
Yeah.
And the Texas Hill Country with rattlesnakes and they're there.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and it's dry. I mean, there's yes, the river, but it can get really dry out there. And that is not hospitable country. Like,
No.
it is
Well, and
now
it
because
was,
there's wineries up the road, which is
yeah,
important.
it's
We like
changed.
that. But,
It's,
you know, But when you think about them coming over from Poland, that's a shock.
Big shock.
Yeah.
And they didn't have any money. There was no, the work dried up pretty quickly. There were floods and droughts, and I mean, it just really was a terrible time. And then, of
Mm.
course, the war, and then after the war, all of the vigilante groups that were running along the back roads. It was just a really dangerous time.
But that is true though about the vigilantes because the West had that, you
Oh yeah.
know?
Oh yeah.
Ooh,
The West
that's
had that, and then the Comanche were not, they were serious business, and they
that
did
was the other
not.
thing I was going to bring up. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was yeah. Mm-mm,
I mean, we can, this is not a book about Native Americans and their history. That's not what this
mm-mm,
is. They're not the central, but it was ever present, the conflict
mm-hmm.
between the white settlers and the Comanche. And the immigrants community basically just kind of kept their heads down. They weren't really involved in that. Although there was tension between Germans who were mostly Lutheran, because they were Union, many of them were Union sympathizers. So there was a lot of conflict and vigilantes targeted them as well during and after the
Wow.
war.
Yeah, you gotta, when you think about history and what people went through, and we complain about today, right? And it
Mhm.
is, I mean, we're living in wonky modern history right now, right? I'm
Mhm.
using that word politely. It's the only
Mhm.
polite way of putting it, the way the world is, but when you think about what people went through before us in areas like, I always think that about Colorado too, like Texas and Colorado.
Mhm.
Um, Colorado, these people would go and dry farm there'd be immigrants going there, and women were doing a lot of the farming, like you were saying. Women were left behind, and the men would go off. But the
Mhm.
women's story, though, there's like inner strength and resilience of these women
Oh.
that would be left there. And like you're saying, there's all these vigilantes, there's, the Comanche uprisings, and there's all of this going on, and
Mhm.
you're in a completely different place that works differently and has different language, and
Yeah.
that's another part, right?
Oh,
It's
for sure. And they're
uh
just, and I couldn't resist. I mean, I think that in times like that, people do things they might not all otherwise do, right? Out of fear, out of survival instinct. You're tested in those. And I think that's a big, strong theme in this book, is that there are forces outside of our control that mess with us, that make us question our faith, make us question our morals, right and wrong. And things get inverted sometimes. And how do you stay the course? How do you kind of keep focused on what you believe to be right? And it's really hard to do
mm,
that in this kind of environment.
yeah, because you're in survival mode,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's a dangerous place to be, because
Yes.
if someone pushes you beyond your boundaries, you could do something you would never do. So
Well, and that's what Martin does. And he lives to wonder if he has brought this all on himself and his family. And there's a real struggle that he goes through, um, uh, that is seeking revenge. And vengeance is a really strong theme here. And it surprised him. And I think that's a big part of this too.
mm. So what's it like writing male characters as a woman,
Mm.
writing a male character and nailing that part?
Well, I hope I nailed it. So early versions of this book had both the wife and the husband voices throughout. It was just really too long. And the so I had to make some choices. And I did, because I was so drawn to this character of Martin and this notion of personal failing and his guilt. Um, I I was able to sort of get inside his head. I also think that these are men who uh, they were men beyond their times. I do think. I think
Mm,
because they were very religious, at least in the first generation, um, that was something I thought was kind of interesting to write from. And they
mm,
loved their wives. They loved the women in their
mm,
lives. They loved their daughters. And so I don't know. I guess it was a challenge, and I wanted to see if I could do it. And
mm.
so that's what drew me.
Ah, I think this is cool. So now are you going to do like like, where everybody gets together, book clubs, and I can see Texas book clubs happening. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, I hope so. If you want to do a book club, call me. I just, I think they're really great. I did a couple of events, one in Dallas and one in San Antonio a few
Cool.
weeks ago, and that was super fun. And I'll be back in Austin at the end of May and then going to Bandera in June. So, I've had an opportunity to kind of get there. That's definitely a market that is interested in this book for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. I think it's great. I think, when historical fiction comes out and it's, focusing on your region, everybody wants to read what did she write about us? So what's your next book? Are you allowed to talk about that or
Well, sure. I mean, I stumbled upon a murder mystery still unsolved. I haven't left Bandera
you
yet.
like rabbit holes for
I do. I
sure,
like
huh?
rabbit
Yeah,
holes.
yeah.
But this is a crazy story. So there were, and it was reading the newspapers. That's where I get a lot of my inspiration for characters. You read
Okay.
everything from the ads to what's on sale at the mercantile to, who was put in jail at the drunk tank over the weekend to, who bought
Cool.
what ranch.
Gossip.
So there gossip and then gossip too. But there was a story that came out in 19, I think it was 29, 22 or 29. I'm not remembering in the moment. But anyway, it was an expose of these 8 German settlers who were murdered by vigilantes in the aftermath of the Civil War. They were all hung with the same rope. They hung them one at a time. And then the 8th guy was like, just shoot me. And so they did. But there was a 9th person and they don't know what happened to them. And also, all of the perpetrators got away. They disappeared after they committed this crime. They basically absconded with these people's belongings and their clothes and their horses and their money. Um, so I'm writing a novel about who got away and what happened to the perpetrators.
Is this in Texas?
Yeah, it's in Bandera.
Oh my gosh. No way. What the heck, man?
It was in Bandera. They have it's on somebody's private property. And they have
Wow.
a group grave with a headstone and it's on somebody's ranch down there, but they hung them all from the same tree with the same rope.
That's crazy.
So
That's
that didn't make its way into the book, although the presumed leader of this group inspired the Gaines character that's in
okay.
my book. That's sort of where it dips in, but I want to write a little bit about who got away.
Wow. Bandera's got some stories, man. It's
Yeah.
it's little, but it's not really when you think of it because of everyone's massive ranches out there.
They have massive ranches. It's still a ranching community. It's also, that you probably, if you were there, you went to Archie Blue's Silver Dollar Saloon, the bar that's
That's
underneath the
okay.
general store. That's like been there for almost a century. It originally was called the Foxhole, and then they called it the Silver Dollar, and then a local musician bought it and named it Archie Blues.
I need to go back now because now I'm thinking the whole courthouse thing. This is something
Yeah.
that's kind of a rabbit hole for us is when these big, I mean, look at how big their courthouse was,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So I'm always thinking like, okay, when a town gets a courthouse, that's when a town or a city is now serious.
Yep.
And that means like, oh, we're going to be a community, but then that means stuff went down.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
and now I know why this courthouse is so big.
The courthouse is
Oh,
huge, and there's a great story about how they brought it's limestone, and they brought it up from the quarry, dragging it by ropes. It's like this is how Stonehenge happened, right? This is how these courthouses were built because it was miles away, and they brought it block by
mm,
block and built this. And it was in it was a way to sort of say we are a world of justice, we are a world of civil order, we are a
mm.
modern, city. You're right. I think that is true. But it was also the place where the dance was, there was a spring dance every year that they held at the courthouse, and it was sort of the center of town too.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. I want a margarita now. I don't know why. Wow, Juliet, this is so. I mean, I was gonna say J.E. Sorry, got to get
It's
the name
okay.
straight here. J.E. Everybody, go get the book. It's out now. It's jeweiner.com. That's Weiner. The link is in the episode notes. Now we're all going to go to Bandera. Everyone, again, it's The Wretched and Undone. Oh boy, but
Thank you.
even your title tells you like more's coming.
Yes.
It is.
This
But
is not a beach read. This is not a beach read.
no, but these are good. This is like, yeah, this is good stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you
So good
very
to have
much.
you on this show. Please come back when your next one's out,
Okay, will
get
do.
going, like finish.
All right, I will. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.